right, and we're live. What's going on, guys? This week, I'm gonna actually get into some photogrammetry. Thank you everyone for coming over here and just watching this video, and I hope that it's educational for everyone. I know I've learned a lot. I've done work in photogrammetry in the past, and I'm kind of getting back into it, so I had to remember how to do a lot of things. And it ended up just being kind of a mess. I had to retake my photos a few times because I messed up a few things. And I can talk about kind of some of the things I messed up so that you don't have to make the same mistakes that I made. So let's dive into our photogrammetry stuff. Actually, before I do that, I want to just do a call out to the work that I used last week in my looping animation. I'm going to pull that up on screen here real quick. And these are the guys that do a lot of their own photogrammetry work, and it is amazing. It's really awesome. So let me share some of that with you. So I'm going to switch scene. Okay. And yeah, here, this is, so it's Nature Labs, and they're on Sketchfab. And you can see they have all of these amazing models. This is where I got actually a lot of my plants for that last render. They look really awesome. And they're using photogrammetry for this stuff. So if I click into the model, you can kind of get a look at just how nice these models are with the textures and everything. Zoom in there, a lot of detail. Yeah, I really like their stuff. I've been downloading their stuff, and it's on Sketchfab. It's all downloadable, so as long as you credit them, you can use these models in your renders. If I go into the model inspector here, and we look at the wireframe, they're pretty heavy. Yeah, they've got a lot of geometry, and there is a way to optimize this and bake all of that into the normal map, which I'll probably do a video on at some point. It ends up being quite a long process. So it's not something that's super easy, but if you really like a model and you want to make it more optimal, or you want to use it for a real-time engine, you can definitely do that. That's possible. So yeah, I just want to shout out to these guys for their amazing models, and hopefully we can start creating some models similar to this with this same level of quality. But yeah, let's get into our photogrammetry software. So there's a couple different softwares you can use online. The one that I really like and the one that I've been kind of like digging into is what is it? It's Agisoft Metashape. And it isn't a free software, so you do have to pay for it, but they have a free trial you can use with watermarks if you just want to kind of give it a shot and see if it's what you're looking for. But I love it. It produces some really awesome stuff. And I'm going to kind of walk through the workflow in it, kind of show you how it works, and you can kind of get an idea of if it's something that you want to use. Or if you're already using it, maybe you can learn some things in here. I've had to learn quite a bit as I've been using it. So let's go into there. All right, so you can see here I'm in Agisoft Metashape, and this is so I was gonna do the whole process from scratch, but realized it takes a lot of time to actually produce models and stuff in here. So I didn't want to spend all the time going through there and having to basically wait for things to render and things to calculate. So I already did the whole process, and I've done it with a with a boulder here. This is a boulder just out in the woods, and I took just a bunch of photos of it. At the end of my stream here, I'm actually going to show you a video, or maybe I'll do it in the middle. I'll put the video in the middle. And the video will basically just kind of show you how to take photos, the optimal way to do it. I put together this video ahead of time so that I could kind of give you a step-by-step process of getting the proper lighting and everything for your photogrammetry. So I'll do that in the intermission, and so that you can kind of get an idea for how to do that. And here, I'm going to switch scenes so you can see me. There we go. That's better. So yeah, I'll put that video in the middle here, but let's get into here. All right, we have our 3D model, and right now what we're seeing is we're seeing all of our photos. These are all the photographs that I took, and they're all being lined up and producing a cloud of points. And the way this software works is it takes all of your photos and it looks for overlapping points. So if I come in here, you can kind of see these are the thumbnails of the different images. So I've got an image here and then an image here that's slightly to the right of that last image. And it's figuring out different points of interest in both of those photographs, and it's seeing how much it moves from one point to the next and calculating exactly where those points should line up in 3D space. It's amazing what this can do. It blows my mind every time. So as you can see, I have a ton of photos. I ended up doing, let's see, 112 here, which is honestly even pretty low for what you can do. So the way this software does things is it has a workflow tab up here at the top, and you'll click the workflow tab, and it'll basically just open up these different options as they come available. The first thing that we're going to do is we want to align our photos, which has already been done here. But what I would do if I was starting with a new canvas is I would create a chunk. Which actually there should already be a chunk created. So that'll be this thing right here. And you will either right click on it and you can come down to this add and add photos, or you can go into your workflow and click add photos. When you hit the add photos, I'll just click it, you can actually come in and you can find where all your photos are. So I actually have a bunch of photos that I did of this snake plant. And I just have tons of photos. And these are the photos from the video that will explain how to take photos of a snake plant or just of any object, the video that I'll show you later. But these are the photos that I ended up with from that. And you can select all of these and you can open them and it will add all of them into Metashape. So when we have all of our photos added, then we're going to want to create a sparse cloud. There's basically 3 steps to this. You're creating a sparse cloud, then you want to create a dense cloud, and then you'll create your geometry. And for doing this, once we have our photos in there, it's going to basically create cameras, and that's where all of these thumbnails here are. These are all cameras that have been set up based on points of interest and how the photos are overlapping. So I'm going to go back into my workflow when I have the chunk selected, and I'm going to hit build. It would be build. Align photos is the first step, and that's how you get your sparse cloud. So when I hit the align photos, it's calculating where those photographs go, where they belong in 3D space, and it will figure out all of those and it'll create your sparse cloud. So that's where we're at right here in this project. As you can see, there are going to be some spots that just don't have a lot of information, and typically there's spots that are on top of your object if you're working with a bigger object. The scale of this is pretty big if I remember right. I think it's probably maybe a 10-foot tall boulder in the woods. So we are struggling to get some of this information up on top. What I did to get some of these higher photos is I actually attached my phone to a pole, to a painter's pole, and I extended it all the way up, and then I have a remote that I can just click and take pictures. So for this upper ring of photos here, I just extended up a pole and I was taking pictures remotely from above, which is actually harder than you would think. It's hard to get good photos from that, but I ended up getting it. And a few of these I actually walked up the boulder as I was taking pictures so I could get some more information on top of the boulder. Yeah, so that's kind of how I end up getting all these and aligning them in here. The next thing that I always do before I go on to building my dense cloud is I will actually go into the model tab and I'll go into Gradual Selection. And I'll just do this here. And with this, you can go to Reconstruct Uncertainty. And what this does is this is going to select based on what level I choose. It's going to select points that it's not totally sure on. So if it has a few points that only have a little bit of surety, it only generated those points based on maybe 2 photos versus 5 photos. It's not going to know if it's totally accurate. It's kind of guessing. A lot of it producing these points for the sparse cloud are just kind of guessing where the points should go. So as I bring this slider up, you can see in the viewport. Let me move this. Oh, I guess I can't move it. Let's just drag it down. As I move this slider up, you can see it's selecting a couple of these like outside points. And what it's doing is it's selecting the points, like I said, that it doesn't totally know if it got correct. And usually I try and go somewhere in the middle, around 100 with this. If I go too high, I'm going to start selecting the points that I want to keep in my photo. Right here, this is everything, selecting everything. So I want to select those uncertain points right around this range. And I would hit OK. Now those points are selected. And we want to get rid of those points because we don't want it creating geometry that it doesn't totally know what to do with. So this is just a good way to weed out some of that extra geometry. So I'm going to hit delete. And there we go. We lost all of those uncertain points. Now everything in here has a lot more certainty, and the software is pretty sure it knows what it's doing, what it's creating. So the next step here is now we want to build our dense cloud, which I have already done. Usually building the dense cloud is the longest process. It can take up to an hour to generate, depending on how many photos you have. The more photos you have in your project, the longer it is going to take to produce your different steps of the process. In the dense cloud, I'm going to click here to view it since it's already created. And look at that. Isn't that amazing? I love seeing this. Let's hide our photos. If you click on the camera tag here and you hit show thumbnail, we can actually, oh, there we go. We can hide our photos so we get a better view of our geometry or our cloud. And right there, it already looks like geometry. But what it has done is it's taken those sparse points and it has just duplicated them and taken more, built more information. And it's also getting a lot of it's getting the vertex colors too, which is cool. So we get a texture generated based on taking what those points that it is, those reference points, the color in the photographs. So we actually get some sweet textures. But yeah, as I zoom in, you can see like this is crazy. So how many points are in here? And you can tell that it's not actually geometry. It's just a bunch of points right in here. Yeah, which is sweet. It looks so cool. Look at all that detail. I love how much detail you can get from this. This is why I think photogrammetry is awesome for creating photorealistic renders because you can take things that really exist and you can actually generate them in 3D space on your computer. It's awesome. Like you can create realistic renders, photorealistic renders because you have photorealistic objects in your scene. Yeah, I love this stuff. I'm definitely going to dig deeper into this and continue to try and produce assets. I'd love to start sharing some of my assets that I'm creating and allowing other people to use them as well. Maybe at some point I'll start doing that. But also I do want to I do just want to apologize for the audio quality. I'm still trying to figure out my audio and video right now. I don't have a good option for it. Eventually, I'm going to start using my Sony Alpha 6000 that I got. It's actually a pretty base level camera, but it does do really awesome video. And I'm hoping to actually start using this for my webcam. Right now, I'm just using my integrated webcam on my computer. But that's the goal eventually. And then I need to get a mic that works for what I'm doing. So I apologize for the video and audio quality right now. It's not where I want it to be, but I'm slowly kind of adding things on as I do this. And eventually, I'm hoping that the quality of my stream will go up since I'm just kind of doing it for the fun on the side and doing it as a way for me to learn and hopefully help other people learn in the process. But cool. All right. So we got our cameras. We got our 112 cameras aligned. We've got our dense cloud produced. Yeah, you can see right here, this is without the vertex colors. You're just getting the dense cloud that's a solid color. And it's really, yeah, it's just really detailed. It's cool. All right, so next, we are going to create the geometry. Well, actually, I'm going to take a step back. So a step that I did, which is not showing here because I already took away a lot of the information, is normally when you're doing this, you're not just going to get a clean model in the center of your scene like this. There's going to be points all over the place. There'll be points all the way over here. When I did this, I had a whole forest scene because it scanned not only the object in the center of my photos, but all of the trees and underbrush and rocks that were around this thing. So the way that I cleaned all of that up, because all I wanted was my main subject, which is the boulder here in the center. I didn't want all of this other stuff on the outside. What I had to do was I would come into my selection tool and I go with the Freeform Selection. And you can drag and select points. So if I'm like, I want to get rid of this right here, I can go with that. And let's see. There we go. It should select those points. So whatever I'm doing there, it's going to just select everything inside there. And I can, let me get to a better view here. So we'll just say, I want to keep this tree in the end, but I'm going to, for now, for example, I'm just going to get rid of it. So if I would select right between here, I don't want to get any of the boulder because I don't want to lose my boulder. And then I can delete. And come in here and delete. And this will actually speed up your final geometry process because you won't have nearly as many points that it's trying to generate. I'll come around to the side, select that, delete, and there we go. We have that tree out of our render. The reason I actually want to keep it for the final is because there's actually some information. Well, it actually did a good job. I was thinking there would be some information behind the tree that I wasn't going to have, so I'd have a big hole in my boulder. But it looks like it did a pretty good job of getting all of that. That's awesome. Maybe we'll keep that out then. Let's keep that tree out of there. These trees are going to be a lot harder because these are actually you can see there's holes back there, and I want those to be hidden, so I'm not going to actually deal with getting rid of those. Cool. All right, there's our model right there. So now we want to create the geometry. Now that we've cleaned everything up, we've gotten rid of all of those uncertain points, we've gotten rid of all the different points around the outside of our central object. I'm going to go into my, let's see, I'm going to go into my workflow tab, and I want to build my mesh. That's the next step. So when I hit the build the mesh, which I, again, have already done, it's going to work through all that. It's going to take all of those points, and it's going to create geometry from those points. And this is what we will end up with, is our geometry right here. When you hit the build mesh, I think I can actually hit, let's see what happens if I go build mesh. Okay, so when I do this, it'll bring up these options here. There's a height map, which is a 2.5D. I've actually never really messed with that. I'm not exactly sure what that does. Maybe I'll try and see, like, mess around with that in the future. But for now, we're just going to go with the arbitrary 3D. This is going to give us our 3D model. And you can either generate from your sparse cloud or your dense cloud. And obviously we want to use our dense cloud because the dense cloud is going to give us a lot more information to work with, which will give us much better geometry. So we'll go dense cloud. I think using the sparse cloud would be if you have a massive scene. If you were using like drone footage and you wanted to get an entire city or something, you don't need an entire dense cloud to get the geometry. You would do it all in your sparse cloud. But we'll do the dense cloud. And then you can choose how many faces. So I selected medium for this. As you can see, it's not terribly heavy geometry, which I prefer that. I don't like having to work with really heavy geometry. But if you want to do a baking process where you're going to bake down those normals and then you'll optimize the model, then you could go with the high and you could get all of these faces, which is going to be a lot of faces. But again, I went with the medium. You can even choose custom. You can do as high as your computer will handle. And then in the advanced tab, we have the option for interpolation. I just keep it on the default. That tends to give me the best results. And at that point, you would hit OK. And you also, if you want to keep your vertex colors, which you're going to need the vertex colors to generate a texture, your textures. So I would recommend keeping that on unless you just want a geometry. At this point, we would hit OK, and it's going to generate our mesh, which is what we have right here. So look at that. That's really clean. It did a good job. There's a few holes in it, and we're going to clean those up later. But for the most part, it's pretty filled in. We got a little hole there. Oh yeah, that looks good. Cool. Um, and then you can also see, so I have it on the solid view. These are all your view options, by the way. I have it on the solid view. You can look at the wireframes. You can see what geometry you're working with, and then you can go to textured, and you get the final textured product, right? Well, I guess not final product. We're gonna do some more work to this, but dang, that's that detail. That's beautiful. And this isn't even on the highest settings, which is the cool part. But since I'm in here, I want to sort of mention a project that I was working on in the past. It's been a little while since I've done this, or it's been working on this. But excuse me, my allergies are killing me right now. um, yeah. Sorry. Um, yeah. Let me. So I was working on this sort of side project. I called it Clean, and it was a an app for rock climbers. And what I was doing was I was going out into the woods, excuse me, and I was doing photogrammetry of different boulders out in the woods that we would climb, and taking those boulders, creating geometry from it, and adding it to an app that I was having developed. And the app basically allowed you to go in there and you could plot your own routes on the boulder, and you could get uh, a really cool 3D representation of what the boulders were going to look like. So when you were going out climbing, you could kind of ahead of time figure out exactly what you wanted to climb. You could use it as a way to plan how you were going to climb your routes. So let me share a video that I made. I'm going to take myself off the screen here and come in here. Um, Give me a second here. I should have had this pulled up ahead of time, but I didn't. All right. Yeah, and it was going to be a cool idea. It ended up just being a lot of work. I was not ready for the amount of work it was going to take to produce this. But it is going to be a cool idea, and I may come back to it at some point. Right now, I'm kind of holding off on it, but yeah, it's cool what you can do. It takes time. It takes a lot of time to produce this kind of stuff. So here's the video. I'm gonna bring it up here so you guys can watch this here. And this is sort of the app that I had created. This is like a little promo I had. Um, and as you can see, the idea was you could search boulders, the different climbs in your area, and you would select it, and then it's a fully 3D thing. So you can rotate around it. You can kind of see what you're looking at, zoom in, get really high detail, which is awesome for climbers because it allows climbers to uh, get an idea of what they're going to be climbing and kind of plan. We call it beta, plan their beta ahead of time. And then, yeah, as you can see, you can look at the routes, and I was going to have a rating system. So yeah, it was going to be a cool idea. I just kind of ended up hitting a roadblock with the amount of work it was taking. So I never ended up finishing it, but this is so that's what this is. All that to be said, me explaining that this is what this boulder was for. Is originally it was for one of my routes for the app. Um, but yeah, okay. So now that we have this, we're gonna also want to build our textures because right now we're just using vertex points. So we're gonna go back into the workflow, hit build texture, and it's sweet because you can actually choose exactly how big you want this texture. So if you want just a small texture that's going to be more optimal, you can change that down to maybe a 1K texture. The default is 4K. And the blending mode is just kind of how it blends out on the texture. So I just keep this on default because that seems to be the best option. And then you've got different mapping modes. The generic is sort of your normal, what you would see when you open a photogrammetry model is it'll map everything out in honestly the most user-friendly way, the best way for us to go in later and edit the texture. So I keep it on generic. And then, yeah, we want to enable hole filling, enable the ghosting filter, and then we'll hit OK, and it would generate our textures, which I have already done, which is why you can actually see the texture right now, is because I've got a texture on there. And after that, that's pretty much it. It's super easy. I love this software because all you're doing is you're going into your workflow tab and you're just hitting each button along the way and building everything out as you go. There is a lot more you can do with this. You can, the chunks, you can add multiple chunks, which is if you have a big object, then you can actually, and you can't get it all in one model, you can actually do multiple shoots and then you can create multiple chunks. So it'll basically create multiple separate pieces of geometry and then it will fuse all of them together and give you one final thing, which is awesome because you don't have to do everything in one go. You can do it in multiple goes, bring it all together in several chunks, and then merge the chunks together, producing one big piece of geometry. So that's a cool little thing you can do. Something that I like to do if I'm using an object similar to, let's say, a potted plant, is if I want to get a full object that has a bottom, a top, and everything, when I'm taking my photos, I obviously can't get photos underneath the model unless I'm suspending it in air, which is something you can do. It's kind of tricky. But what I'll do is I'll take pictures of the top of the pot and all those photos. Then I'll turn the pot over, take pictures of the bottom, and create two separate chunks that I can merge together. So I have the bottom of my pot and then the top, and I bring them together into one. Which is, yeah, just such a cool thing you can do. So you can end up with full geometry. As you can see here, it's just an open hole underneath, and that's because there really isn't anything down here. We can fill that up later, but you're never going to see under the ground. I mean, there's no point in having that even. So once we're done with our whole workflow here, we would go to edit, or let's see, I'm gonna have to remember how to do this. File, export, and then we can choose to export whatever we're looking for. So you can export your texture, get the textures out, export your model. If you want to just export the points, so you have that point data. Maybe you're going to use that point data later for something else. And you can actually do that, and it will export it as I believe it's a JSON file, but I'm not totally certain about that. So let me show you what it looks like finalized here, and let's see. Go back to my desktop. All right, and we're gonna open this in. Let's open this in Cinema 4D. So while that opens, actually I'm gonna close it. It'll crash my computer here. I will discard that. I don't need those changes. All right. Okay. Yeah, and you can see this is a pretty heavy model. I think this was actually a different one that I had done with a higher level of geometry. So this is opening. Let's see. Well, it's going to take a little bit of time. Well, while this is opening, let's hit our intermission, and I'm gonna show you the video that I produced that kind of explains the whole process. So let's do that. And we're here with our object, and this is where we're going to be taking all of our photographs. And as you can see, I have my lighting set up in a very specific way. For photogrammetry, it's really important to have good lighting. It's one of the most important things. It will save you tons of time and headache later in the process if you can make sure that your lighting is good now, so you're not doing a lot of post-editing. So as you can see, I have these light boxes set up on these two sides of the room where I do not have windows in my room. And the reason I'm doing this is that I can get even lighting on my object, so I have lights coming from all sides, and then I'm in a well-lit room with plenty of windows, so I'm getting a lot of that diffuse light coming in, especially if you're trying to do this outside, it's really important that you don't have any sunlight coming in, creating shadows, because those will be in your model. We want to be able to light our model in the 3D software. So having the lighting coming in, it just won't work for you. And in terms of taking the pictures, you can use any camera you want. I've done it with my phone before. It takes really nice shots. For this, I'm actually going to use the Sony Alpha 6000, and it's a very affordable camera. I think I paid $400 for this camera and the lens, so anybody can afford something like this. And I'm going to be using this just so I can get some nice shots, get some high detail shots for my textures that I'm going to be using when I create the geometry. So I'm going to kind of show you how I take my pictures. I usually will start from one side. I kind of pick sort of the front of my object, wherever I want to be, where I'm going to be coming back around, and somewhere that I can remember that I started. And we'll come in here, and usually I want to take a couple rings of photos. So you're going to want to go around the base of your object, taking pictures and moving about 5 inches each shot as you rotate around your object, taking pictures. And then you want to come from above, do the same thing from above. And usually I'll go from the very top and get some straight down photos so that I can make sure I'm not missing any information in my photographs. So I'm just going to start here. I'm going to come down here, right down at the base, making sure that my object is in focus, making sure also that my light information as well is doing good, that I don't have too many dark spots or too many light spots. And take a shot, and then I take a step over and take another shot. And for this process too, it's not crazy important that your steps are exactly the right amount of distance. It's really, you just want to make sure that the photos will have information to stitch together. So as long as you have some overlap in your images, then you know that you'll have some good information to work with. It can be a little more tricky. There are a couple solutions where you can actually suspend this from something. You take pictures from underneath. It can be a little tricky, or you can take pictures on a transparent ground. So you can take a piece of plexiglass and you could place your object on that and take pictures underneath it. So I'm going to do that now. Take just this piece and some dirt around here, wipe that off. Get it all clean. All right. And now I'm going to put this object down, and I'm going to do the same exact process. Basically, like this is a second piece of geometry that we're creating. So let's do that real quick. lot easier, and you'll have much better quality images because you won't be moving around and there won't be quite as much of that human error built into it. But you can get a turntable that you can put your object on, and you can have it slowly rotate as you take pictures, and you're not actually moving your camera, you're just moving the object. One thing to be careful with when you're using that type of method is if you have geometry in the background, the software will actually mistake what's going on in the background and think that the object isn't moving, so it won't know how to stitch the images together because it won't see the turning as different images. So you need to be careful when you're doing that you have a completely flat background, so there's no information being picked up, and the software won't be confused with what's going on with the turntable. So that's another thing you can do to kind of speed up this whole process of taking all of your photographs. Now that we have all of our photo information on our object, let's hop into the computer and we'll start putting this stuff together. All right, and we're back. I hope that was helpful just on how to take pictures for your photogrammetry. And my model has now loaded in. As you can see, this is a very high version of what we created earlier. So we have a ton of information here. We definitely don't want this. If we try and render this is honestly just from the geometry is going to take forever, and it's going to slow down your viewport a ton when you have a whole scene in here. So what I normally would do is either generate a lower dense geometry from the Photogrammetry software, or you can actually optimize it, and I have a whole workflow in oh man, I'm blanking. I have a whole workflow in ZBrush. That's what I'm looking for. ZBrush, where I actually take the high geometry and I bake it down into a lower geometry mesh, and I export all of this high detail stuff into normal maps and displacement maps. I'm going to actually go over that probably in a different video, just again because it's just a long workflow and I don't have time today to get into all of that. And I need to refresh on it. It's been a while since I've done any work in that. But this is what we end up with is this really high poly model, and I went in, optimized everything, and I end up with a lower poly model here. So I'm going to hide this one, and we'll reveal this guy. And this is what we have. You can see it's much cleaner geometry. It's really been optimized. I filled in some holes. It looks like we still have a few holes in here that we could go in and clean up. And I have my texture that we generated, and all I have is my texture, diffuse map going into the color here, nothing crazy. And let's get a higher. Let's just make that look nice. We'll go up to 2K. There we go. That looks way better. Yeah. So that's looking good. That's looking really good. One thing that is really hard to avoid, especially if you're doing something outside without controlled lighting, is you end up with a lot of built-in ambient occlusion in your 3D model, or in your textures rather. And you don't want that. You want it to be a very diffuse texture. You can see what I'm saying. Like in the cracks here, it's a lot darker, and you don't want that because you want that to be produced when you drop a light in your scene. So I'm going to go over my process of removing some of that ambient occlusion from your textures. It's really a pretty simple process, and I think it helps a lot with your final object fitting into your 3D environment much better. So the first thing I want to do just for my own, for myself is rotate this. I'm just going to, I'll just quickly rotate it so I can view it better. Then I will create well, first we'll create a new material, and it's just going to be a blank PBR material here. Drop that on top, delete the that old material on there. And then I'm going to right click on my model and go into bake material. And what we're trying to do here is create an ambient occlusion map so we can figure out where those points on our texture that are already too dark need to be lightened up. And we'll do that in Photoshop or in some photo editing software. To do that, I'm going to hit the ambient occlusion spot right here and go into my tag and change this up to whatever resolution I'm looking for. I'll just go 1024 for now, go with the 1K. Make sure the width and the height are the same so that we get an even texture. And with that checked, I can hit bake, and there we have it. Right there is our ambient occlusion map. Let me make sure. One thing that might happen is sometimes your photogrammetry software will actually bring in all of your geometry like this, where your normals are facing inward. So your normals are the wrong way. And if you do that, I'll just give you an example of what happens when you bake. You'll end up with this really dark ambient occlusion, which doesn't make any sense. It's basically reversed from what you're looking for. And the reason it's doing that is because your normals are reversed. So all you have to do is Command A on polygon mode to select all of your polygons and then hit UR. And that will reverse them all so that they're all facing the correct direction. That way we're not getting the really dark ambient occlusion. So we have this, and we can save the ambient occlusion out. I'll just save it as a JPEG. Okay, and just drop that on my, let's go folder AO, drop that on my desktop. And then I'm going to minimize this and go into Photoshop real quick. And here in Photoshop, we can actually delight our texture. It's called delighting. And by delighting it, we're making it a completely an albedo texture, which means that there's no lighting information in the texture. It should make it a very flat texture that we have. So I'm gonna come in here. You can see all my projects. That's fun. Into my Boulder folder, grab my diffuse texture that I'm working with. And then I want to go into File and let's place our ambient occlusion in here. We've got that. Hit Enter. And I'm going to want to use this as my selection tool to delight this texture. So here I'm going to hit the rectangle select and just select the whole canvas and hit Command C to copy all of the pixel information on the screen. And then I'm going to come in here and let's create a brightness and contrast brightness and contrast map, or layer rather. And in here I want to go into my mask of it. So I'm hitting layer and then switching to the channels tab, and then make that your mask layer visible and hide the rest of it. Oh, actually, so I'm on the wrong one. I want it to be selected on this mask right here. So come in here, hide those, and then I'm gonna hit Command V to paste. That's pasting my ambient occlusion map onto the mask of the brightness and contrast. I believe that's what should have happened. Well, let me make sure. It looks like it didn't actually do it the way I wanted. I'm going to delete this layer mask. Come in here. Let's try this again. And copy, hide that, and then in here, and then we want to create a mask. Make sure there's a mask there. There we go. And then in the mask, hide the rest of this. Sorry, there we go. Paste it in. There we go. Now it's being applied to the alpha of our hue and saturation, so you can see where that mask is going to appear. So if I go back into my layers and bring this back, I can adjust the brightness and contrast, and it will only adjust where our ambient occlusion was. So let's just go crazy here. Okay, so there's something into this not happening how we want it. It's actually doing the opposite of what we want. It's affecting everything else except for the spots that we're trying to affect. So if I bring the brightness all the way down, you can see it's brightening up in here, or it's rather darkening everything else but the spot that we want to brighten up. So I'm going to come back into my channels, go into that masked area, and hide all these other, and I keep doing that. And then I have everything selected. I'll go rectangle, select it all, and then I'm going to hit Command I, and that will inverse that ambient occlusion. So now it will it'll affect the spots that we want it to affect, only those dark spots. And with this, we want to basically brighten up those areas inside there that are darker than we want them to be. So I'm just kind of mess around with that. We can also do the same thing here, but maybe with a levels. So I can add mask to selection. But first I gotta have nothing there. Now I can add mask to selection and then come into my layers, and we'll add a new adjustment layer. Let's add a levels. I think, yeah, we'll go with the levels. And then I can sort of mess with my levels. And again, it's only going to be affecting those ambient spots. And for this, I want to sort of bring those highlights in a little bit. Yeah, we're trying to make it all an even amount of brightness as much as we can, so that there's no darker spots on our geometry here. Let's see, it's looking pretty good. Bring this up, crunch these colors a little bit. Again, we're just trying to get rid of our lighting information in the model so that we have evenly lit model. So when we apply our lights in the 3D software, we'll end up with a well lit model according to the lights in the 3D and not according to what was in the original photographs when we took them. So see what's going on here? It's lighting all of that stuff underneath there. It's going to make it a lot more even. I also added this. This was not in the photogrammetry, but I added a little stump texture kind of to the base of those trees that are sticking up, just for the fun of it. Awesome. So now if we export this, and I'm going to export as a JPEG or a PNG, whichever you prefer. And we've got our 4K resolution. And I want to just call this bolder instead of diffuse. I'm going to call it albedo. Yeah. Another thing that we can do if we want to create a specular map is we can actually do that by, well, so there's several different ways we can do that. The way that I want to do that is I want to get my specular information directly from what's going on here. And for that, I'm going to basically, let's just get rid of these. We'll save this as a new project. So we're not going to need any of these maps anymore. This is something that I do. So I have this kind of like moss, zoom in here, this moss on the rock, and I want the moss to be less reflective than the actual rock part of the rock, because that moss stuff is not going to be, reflecting as much light as the stone will be. So to get that, I'm going to select the green parts of my thing, of my texture. So I'll go into select, and we'll hit color range. And I can color pick some of my green in here somewhere. Let's find a good green color. You can see it's my color that I'm selecting is over here. I like that. That looks pretty middle range green. And bring the fuzziness up, which will basically increase that selection. Somewhere in there. It really depends on how much contrast we want to create. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I've got a lot of that green moss selected. I could probably go higher with it, but we'll stick with this for now. And I'm going to create a new, let's see, we want to create a new fill layer, so solid color here. So if I click create that, and then I want to choose a color based on how reflective I want that moss to be. So generally, when you're creating a specular map, you want the more reflective spots to be a brighter, a higher, closer to white, and then anything that's less reflective to be closer to a black. So if I want that moss to be basically non-reflectant, I'm going to bring it way down here. And now you can see we have, if I hide my base layer, all of this in here is going to be non-reflective. It's going to be at least like very low reflection. Let's do the same thing again. I'm going to hide this guy. And we'll go into my select color range, select the green again. And this time I'm going to bring it way up a lot higher. Not quite that high. Somewhere in there. This will be our second layer of moss. That's going to be slightly more reflecting because it's closer to the stone, but still not very reflectant. I'm going to create a solid color. And we'll go with like, yeah, somewhere still pretty dark in here. Okay, so now we got all of this information. Now I want to let's see. Well, let's get our trees here. So for the trees, they're going to be a pretty even amount of reflectiveness. So I'm gonna duplicate this layer so I still have a backup of it and hide that. And in this guy, let's name things. We want to make sure everything is named well. So this will be Moss 1. This will be Moss 2. This guy I'm going to select, and I'm going to use my polygon select so I can select just the trees here. So let's go select around the trees, not getting any of that stone in there, because that's going to have a different reflective property than, or a specular property than the trees are going to have. So we want to make sure we get all of this stuff. Anything where it's sort of that blurred, that's actually not showing up. That's part of the UV that, oh, I'm on a negative. That's not even there. So we don't have to even worry about that as long as we're getting sort of around our actual model here. Select that. And get right in here. There we go. Okay. Oh, let's just get this guy. We'll get this guy in here too. Perfect. Now I'm going to mask out this this layer here. So now we are just going to be affecting this the tree parts of our texture. And for the tree parts, I want to make sure this is a black and white, because if it's just black and white tones, then we know that it's we know like basically what colors or how it's going to affect the specular better. For that, I'm going to come into my layer, new adjustment layer, and let's make it. Let's first go to. Hey, yeah, let's go black and white first. Okay. Add that in there. There we go. And we can actually affect these sliders. And I'm going to, let's see, hold Alt and click in between the two textures or the two layers. That way it's only going to affect this layer, which we are going to name wood. And I can choose kind of what parts of the wood I want to be more reflective or how I want this to be affected. So I'm going to bring this up because I do want the wood to be more reflective than our moss. It needs to be a lighter color here. And kind of mess around with this. The cyan and the green will actually affect moss on the tree, so I want those colors to be lower. So I want any moss growing to be a less reflective or less specular rather color. I like that. Cool. All right, so now we've got our wood and how the wood is going to be reflective. And you can see again, we've got sort of these highlights on the top of the wood, and like those grooves in the wood are going to be less specular, which is actually awesome. That's what we want. And come back in here. I'm going to duplicate this bottom layer again, just so I make sure I have a backup. Bring this up to the front. And let's do the stone part of our geometry here. And I think for this, I think I'm going to go back into my selection and color range. And let's select some like the gray part. So we're gonna get the most gray parts are gonna be a lot more specular because light will bounce off of stone much more readily than it will off of the ground or the wood or the moss even. So we want to go. I don't want to be too generous here. I like something like that. Sweet. And then I'm going to create another solid. And for this, I want it to be pretty high on the value. All right. And I want this layer to be, so this is my stone. I want this to actually be underneath the moss because I want that moss to still show through. Actually, underneath even the wood because I want the wood to be on top of it as well since that's a selective spot. Perfect. So this is what we're getting so far. We're getting pretty close. I think the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my, we don't need this one, take my bottom layer, which I'm going to duplicate again, hide the bottom. I'm just going to name this backup. And I'm going to apply, duplicate my black and white filter and apply this directly to the bottom layer here. And we'll sort of mess with these colors. It looks like this red is mostly affecting that sort of dirt under the dirt part of the rock underneath, and I actually don't want that to be very reflective because that's like more of a sand. It's a sandstone, so it's more sandy, not quite as specular. So I'm going to bring that red lower, and then some of this yellow. Bring that down. Maybe bring the green up a little bit. Actually, I'll bring the yellow up some. All right. It looks like my wood is a lot darker than everything else on my model here, on my texture here. So I think and I wanted that to be a more reflective property. So I'm gonna bring it up some. It's because I'm bringing that green so far down. We might want to apply another layer to this. Oh, I didn't even hit my blues. There we go. Or my magentas. Shouldn't affect much. So yeah, let's apply another adjustment layer to the wood. I'm going to come back in here. Let's go to layer, new adjustment layer, and we're just going to. I'm going to go into levels again. And again, let's see. Yeah, okay. So it's underneath there, so it's only affecting our wood. And let's scrunch this up some, so we'll get more contrast. But I want those highlights to pop a lot more. And then bring the overall gamma down. Yeah, see, so that's going to be a lot more specular. You're going to get a lot better specular highlights now. Maybe I want a little more dark. I think I like that. All right, there we have it. So now we have a specular map, and a lot of this is you kind of learn as you create more of these how to make things the right level of reflectiveness in your texture, and kind of figure out how to make these textures look better. But this is sort of just a rough way. I would bring this into my software, into my 3D software, and apply it to the material and kind of see how it looks, and maybe come back into Photoshop and save this Photoshop file with all of our changes so that we can make adjustments to the specular levels. If we realize we want our moss to be a lot more reflective, then we can come back in here and like bring those values up a lot higher. But this is kind of my way of creating a specular map. I'm sure there's other ways out there to do it that could be more effective. This is just how I've learned to do it. And now we know how to delight our textures that we create. We know how to create a specular map, and then we also, from before, learned how to take a bunch of photographs of an object, upload them into a photogrammetry software, and create geometry and texture from that software to end up with some photorealistic assets. And I think this is as far as I'm going to go for today. I'm hoping that in the future I can do a video on how to optimize those assets so that we can take our 3D models out of the photogrammetry software, go really high with the poly count, and then bring them into another software that we can optimize them down, make it a much lower level of polygons, but retain a lot of that information by generating a normal map and a displacement map. There's two different sort of workflows that I know of how to do that, so I'll probably go into those two different workflows at some point. But I hope that this was helpful, and yeah, I hope that you guys will come out and see what I have to work on next week. So have a good weekend.